Have you ever noticed that some people tear up during commercials while others rarely cry? You might think it's just about being sensitive or emotional, but the truth is far more fascinating. Your tears are actually your brain's way of communicating something important about how you're wired. Welcome back. Today, we're diving deep into the neuroscience of why some people cry easily, and more importantly, what your brain is actually trying to tell you when it does. Let's start with the basics. Crying isn't just an emotional response. It's a complex neurological process involving multiple brain systems working together. When you see something sad, happy, or even just beautifully moving, a specific pathway lights up in your brain. And it all starts in a tiny almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. Your amygdala is your brain's emotional processing center. It's constantly scanning your environment, looking for emotional significance. Think of it as your internal emotional radar. When it detects something emotionally relevant, it doesn't ask permission. It immediately sends signals throughout your brain and body. For people who cry easily, this amygdala tends to be more reactive. It's like the volume is turned up higher than in other people. But here's where it gets interesting. Recent brain imaging studies show that people who cry easily don't just have a more reactive amygdala. They also have stronger connections between their amygdala and a region called the anterior insula. This is your brain's awareness center. It's responsible for detecting and processing internal body states. When these two areas are strongly connected, you become hyper-aware of your emotional responses. You notice the tightness in your chest, the lump in your throat, the tension building before the tears even come. Now let's talk about neurotransmitters, the brain chemicals that regulate emotion. One of the most important ones here is serotonin. People who cry easily often have variations in how they process serotonin, which affects how intensely they feel emotions. This isn't a deficiency or a problem. It's just a different neurochemical setup. Another key player is oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone. Studies suggest that people with higher sensitivity to oxytocin tend to cry more easily, especially in social situations. This makes evolutionary sense. Crying was a way for humans to signal vulnerability and build stronger social bonds. Your ancestors who cried more easily were often more socially connected, which meant better survival outcomes. There's also a fascinating element involving your mirror neuron system. These are neurons that fire both when you perform an action and when you watch someone else perform it. For people who cry easily, their mirror neuron system appears to be more sensitive. This means when you see someone else crying or experiencing emotion, you literally feel echoes of that emotion in your own brain. You're not just empathizing intellectually. Your brain is genuinely resonating with theirs. Let's talk about the limbic system as a whole. Your limbic system is your emotion center, and it's ancient. It evolved long before your prefrontal cortex, which is your rational thinking brain. In people who cry easily, there's often a pattern where the limbic system has stronger influence over the rest of the brain. Your emotions aren't being filtered as heavily through logic before they're expressed. Now here's something important. This doesn't mean your emotions are out of control or that you're weak. In fact, studies show that people who cry easily have different neural architecture in ways that could be considered advantages. For instance, they often show greater activation in the anterior cingulate cortex, which is involved in processing emotional pain and empathy. This makes them naturally more empathetic people. Your brain chemistry also influences how quickly you reach your tearing threshold. Imagine your nervous system has a set point, like a thermostat. For easy criers, that emotional temperature threshold is just lower. It takes less stimulus to reach the point where tears flow. This involves your autonomic nervous system, the part of your nervous system that controls things you don't consciously think about, like heart rate and tear production. When you encounter something emotionally significant, your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your body's calming branch, activates. This is what actually triggers tears. For people who cry easily, the parasympathetic system responds more readily. Your vagus nerve, which is the main highway for your parasympathetic system, is essentially more responsive. There's also compelling research about gender and hormones. While we like to think crying is purely about neurology, hormones play a role too. People with higher estrogen levels tend to cry more easily, though this isn't the only factor. Your brain's baseline hormonal environment affects how your neural systems function. Testosterone, in higher concentrations, seems to suppress tears, which is why hormone levels are part of the equation. But here's where it gets really interesting. Your early life experiences actually shape these neural pathways. If you grew up in an emotionally expressive family, your brain essentially learned to prioritize emotional signals. Your neural pathways became well-worn routes toward emotional expression. Meanwhile, if you grew up in a family that valued stoicism, your brain learned to suppress those signals, and different pathways became strengthened instead. This neuroplasticity means you're not entirely locked into one pattern. Your brain can adapt. Let's discuss what your tears are actually telling you. When you cry easily, your brain is likely signaling a few things. First, you probably have high emotional sensitivity. Your brain is tuned to notice subtle emotional shifts in yourself and others. This is actually a superpower in many contexts. Therapists, teachers, artists, and caregivers often benefit from this trait. Second, your tears often indicate that you have low emotional suppression. While society sometimes frames this as weakness, it's actually neurologically closer to authenticity. You're not expending cognitive energy trying to hide what you feel. That's honestly quite efficient for your brain. Third, easy crying often correlates with what psychologists call emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between subtle different emotions. You don't just feel sad. You feel wistful, melancholic, poignant. Your brain is doing more detailed emotional analysis, and that complexity sometimes overflows as tears. There's also emerging research on what's called the tears and temperament hypothesis. This suggests that people who cry easily have a temperament that includes both heightened emotional sensitivity and strong emotional responsiveness to environmental factors. Your brain isn't stuck in one emotional state. It responds dynamically to the world around you. Now, what about the physical benefits of crying? Recent neuroscience suggests that when you cry, you're actually performing a self-soothing function. Tears contain leucin and enkephalin, an endorphin that's a natural pain reliever. When you cry, you're literally releasing stress-reducing chemicals. For people who cry easily, this system might be more active and more beneficial for their overall stress management. Studies also show that crying activates your parasympathetic nervous system, your rest and digest mode. So when you cry, you're actually moving your body into a calmer state. For easy criers, this might mean they have a more effective emotional release valve. They're literally resetting their nervous system more frequently. There's an important distinction here between crying that feels cathartic and crying that feels distressing. The neuroscience is different. Cathartic crying activates your reward centers. Your brain releases dopamine. It feels sad but also somehow cleansing. But in some cases, particularly for people with anxiety or depression, crying might be less cathartic and more distressing. This depends on which neural pathways are activated and how they're connected to your reward and threat detection systems. Let's address the social dimension. Your brain didn't evolve in isolation. It evolved in social groups. Crying is actually a sophisticated social signal. When you cry easily, you're potentially more adept at communicating your emotional state and creating connection. This isn't manipulation, it's communication. Your brain is telling others, I'm vulnerable, I care deeply, I need support. These are actually valuable signals in human relationships. But here's the reality. In many cultures, especially Western cultures, easy crying is still sometimes stigmatized. Your brain might be wired for emotional expression, but your social environment might send you the message that this is wrong. This creates a conflict between your neurology and your social conditioning. Many easy criers internalize the belief that something is wrong with them, when really their brain is just working differently. The good news is that understanding the neuroscience helps reframe this. Your easy tears aren't a character flaw. They're not a sign of weakness. They're a reflection of how your particular brain is wired. Your amygdala is more reactive. Your mirror neuron system is more sensitive. Your emotional processing regions are more active. These are neurological facts, not moral judgments. So what should you do with this information? First, recognize that your tears are useful feedback. They're telling you something matters to you. They're telling you that you're noticing something others might miss. Second, stop fighting your neurology. The energy you spend trying not to cry could be redirected into processing emotions more effectively. Third, find environments where your trait is valued rather than stigmatized. Certain careers, friend groups, and communities celebrate emotional sensitivity rather than dismiss it. Your brain works differently, and that's not something to apologize for. It's something to understand and appreciate. Finally, remember that while your baseline neurology influences your tendency to cry, you're not locked into any particular response pattern. Your brain is plastic. You can develop better emotional regulation skills without suppressing your natural responses. You can learn to cry when it's helpful and manage it when it isn't, all while respecting your brain's fundamental design. Your tears aren't a malfunction. They're your brain's eloquent way of saying, I feel I care, I'm paying attention. And in a world that often demands we shut down our emotions, that's actually a remarkable gift.